Representative Joe Fitzgibbon is serving his second term representing the 34th District, which includes the communities of West Seattle, Burien, White Center, Vashon, and Maury Island. Joe has a busy schedule in Olympia, serving as the vice chair of the local government committee and on the finance, government operations and elections, as well as the transportation committee. Joe, that's quite a busy schedule. Can you briefly share with us some of what you've worked on in each committee this year?
Yeah, in the local government committee, we have taken a lot of actions to try to make our community safer for our constituents. And one of those was legislation which I sponsored to help fire protection districts have the resources they need to plan for fire protection services in the future. We also stopped a number of bad bills in the local government committee. There was one bill that would have removed a requirement that rental housing have carbon monoxide detectors installed. We heard a lot of really tragic stories about people's families whose lives had been impacted by carbon monoxide poisoning, and we were able to stop that bill and stay on track to get those detectors installed. We stopped a variety of bills that would have weakened our state's strong environmental protections, and that's something I've heard a lot about from our constituents, is that our state's environment is something that we're very proud of, and we don't want to weaken our protections, and so we were able to stop those bills in the local government committee. In the Finance Committee, we have taken a really aggressive approach towards scrutinizing our tax loopholes. Our state has over 600 preferential rates and tax exemptions for different categories of business activity, and we've really tried to go over all of those, and the ones that we don't think the taxpayers are getting our money's worth for, if we're allowing businesses to escape paying taxes and then not contribute towards our public schools, I think that hurts the citizens of our state. So we have a proposal that we've moved out of the Finance Committee yesterday that would close a number of unproductive tax loopholes and reinvest that money into public education in our state. On the Government Operations and Elections Committee, my core focus has been expanding access to our democracy, making it easier for folks to register to vote, making it easier for people to cast their ballots. We passed legislation expanding the number of ballot boxes that would be in our communities. I had legislation that would have extended the timeline that you're allowed to register to vote before an election. Unfortunately, the Senate did not act on the bills to expand access to our democracy, so we'll be back with that next year. And then on the Transportation Committee, we have a really serious transportation problem in our state. We have highways that are falling apart, we have a ferry system that's underfunded, and we have boats that are over 60 years old and need to be replaced. And we have transit, both in King County and elsewhere, that isn't adequately funded, and we are facing really deep service cuts at King County Metro. So we've moved a transportation revenue package out of committee, and we're hoping to pass that into law this year that will provide long-term sustainable funding for our highways, for our ferries, for buses, for bike and pedestrian needs. And there's a number of specific bike and pedestrian needs in West Seattle, Burien, and Vashon, and White Center that will be addressed in that package.
You mentioned tax loopholes. There's been much discussion this year on how we can close our revenue shortfall while funding our schools and protecting our most vulnerable. Can you give us an example of one of those loopholes that is particularly egregious and that should be closed?
Yeah, there's one loophole that saves the oil refineries up in Northwest Washington about $40 million a year. That costs the taxpayers about $40 million a year because that means that's $40 million that's not going into our public schools. It's a tax exemption based on one of the products that they use in their manufacturing process. That the legislature created this exemption aiming it at the timber industry in 1949 before we had any oil refineries here. And then when the oil refineries started to move to Washington, they realized they could use this loophole to save themselves a huge amount of money. It's an exemption that we don't think exists in any other state. As far as we can tell, of the 29 states that have oil refineries, Alabama is the only other one that has this particular loophole, and theirs is more narrowly drawn than ours. So that's one that really jumped out at us. This is one that didn't seem like the taxpayers were getting our money's worth from the oil refineries. The oil refineries benefit from having a well-educated workforce in our state, and they should be contributing their fair share towards making sure that we have great public education.
That seems like common sense to me. Moving on to your specific accomplishments, were you able to pass any new pieces of legislation this session?
Yeah, there's two pieces of legislation that I'm particularly proud of and would love to tell you about. One of them comes from a story that we heard early in the session from a dentist in the district. She had hired somebody who had been previously laid off from their old job, but this dentist, she was only able to hire the person on a part-time basis. And through a funny aspect of our state's unemployment law, this dentist was actually being charged more money for unemployment insurance because she had hired this person. And so we didn't think that was fair. We think that our laws should incentivize hiring people, even if you can only hire them on a part-time basis. It's still better to get them part-time work so that they can start on the road back towards full-time employment. So that legislation made it through both the House and the Senate, and we're really excited about that, and it passed with strong bipartisan majorities in both. Also, we have legislation that considerably simplifies the collection of fuel tax in our state. It reduces the number of different fuel tax licenses. It removes an outdated requirement that license holders for fuel tax have to provide their fingerprints to the state. We thought that was an invasion of privacy, and it isn't something that has resulted in any less fraud. So that's legislation to just simplify and clean up that law, and it should make it easier for the Department of Licensing to collect that tax in a fair and equitable way.
One last question for you, Representative Fitzgibbon. If constituents want to get in touch with you on an issue or plan to visit Olympia, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
I love hearing from folks. You can always call my office at 360-786-7952. And also, email's great, joe.fitzgibbon@ledge.wa.gov. I'll be back in the district as soon as we're done with the legislative session in the next couple weeks, and I'm going to be happy to get together to meet with folks at any time. And so either call or email, and would love to hear what your concerns are.